It's a strange story, like one of those stories that gets told and retold by musicians in quiet moments. After the show, on the bus, or in a studio late at night, it's about a recording session. A session that went wrong and then went somewhere else entirely. Somewhere unexpected. The man at the center of it was maybe the most famous person on Earth. But on this night, he wasn't a star. He was just a man struggling with a song. We have to go back to the early 1970s. He was no longer the young kid who shook up the world. The rebellion was gone, replaced by something else. He was the king, but it was a different kind of kingdom. It was a kingdom of Las Vegas stages, of jumpsuits and karate moves, of sold-out shows, night after night. From the outside, it was the pinnacle of success. He had it all, the mansion, the planes, the money, the adoration of millions. But inside, things were different. People who were there saw it, the pressure was immense. The schedule was brutal. The life was isolating. He was surrounded by people, but he was often lonely. He was living in a bubble he had created, and sometimes it felt more like a cage. He was searching for something real, something to hold on to that wasn't part of the show. And for him, that something was always gospel music. It's easy to forget this part of him. The world remembers the rock and roll. They remember the sneer, the swiveling hips, the movies. But the music that formed him, the music that was in his bones, was the music he heard as a little boy in a small wooden church in Tupelo, Mississippi. It was the sound of people singing with everything they had, singing about faith and struggle and redemption. It was raw and it was powerful. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest before God. He carried that music with him his whole life. When he got famous, he'd still gather friends and his band around a piano and sing gospel hymns for hours. Not for a record, not for an audience, just for himself. It was his comfort, or his anchor. He knew those songs inside and out. He knew the harmonies, the bass lines sung by men like J.D. Sumner, the soaring tenor part. He could sing them all. He loved the quartets, the Statesmen, the Blackwood brothers. These were his heroes, as much as any bluesman or country singer. So when he decided to record a gospel album in 1971, it wasn't a commercial decision. It wasn't a gimmick. It was a pilgrimage. It was him going home musically. He wanted to make a record that meant something to him, away from the demands of Hollywood or his record label, which always wanted another hit single. But he didn't go to a fancy studio in Nashville or Los Angeles. Not for this. He decided to do it at home. At Graceland, he had them bring the recording equipment right to him. Hell, they set it all up in his den. The room the world would later call the Jungle Room. You have to picture this place. It was not a professional recording environment. It was his personal sanctuary, and it was weird. Green shag carpet, not just on the floor, but on the ceiling, too. A built-in waterfall made of fieldstone. Heavy, dark, carved wooden furniture that looked like it belonged on a tropical island. It was kitschy and over the top, but it was his. It was comfortable. This was where he felt he could be himself. He could work at his own pace. The sessions would start late at night and go until dawn. The vibe was loose. Friends would hang out, food would be brought in. It was more like a jam session than a disciplined recording date. And for the musicians, members of his TCB band, it was both a blessing and a curse. When he was on, he was magical. When he was distracted or frustrated, nothing would get done. They were working on a new album, a collection of sacred songs. Some were upbeat and joyful. Others were deep and contemplative. And there was one song in particular, a song known by almost everyone in the world. A simple hymn about salvation and grace, a song he had surely sung hundreds of times in his life. It should have been easy, but it wasn't. They tried it once, it fell apart. The timing was off. The feeling wasn't right. He was getting frustrated. He knew how the song was supposed to feel. He could hear it in his head, but he couldn't get it out. The performance felt hollow, professional, but empty. It lacked the very thing the song was about. Soul. They tried it again. Same thing. It was flat, lifeless, the frustration in the room started to build, you could feel it. The musicians were tense. They were looking at him, waiting for his lead, but he was lost. He was getting angry. Not at them, but at himself, at his inability to connect with a song that was part of his own spiritual DNA. He stopped the take. He stood up, agitated. He paced around the room. The mood turned dark. This was the moment where a session could just die, where the leader gives up and says, let's try something else, or let's call it a night. The magic was gone. The people in that room tell the story in slightly different ways, but the core of it is always the same. His pianist, a man named David Briggs, a brilliant session musician, felt the tension. He knew they were losing the moment. He tried to save it. He started playing the song's introduction again, very softly. Just the simple, iconic chords. He was trying to draw him back in, and this is where things get strange. He heard the piano. He stopped pacing. He walked over to the microphone, but his anger and frustration were still there. He was fighting the song. He was fighting himself. According to some accounts, he said something like, "I can't sing this thing. I can't feel it." Then, an idea came. Maybe it was from the producer, Felton Jarvis. Maybe it was from one of the band members. Nobody is quite sure. The suggestion was simple. Kill the lights. Suddenly, the jungle room with its lamps and spotlights went dark, plunged into near total blackness. It was a trick producers sometimes used to change the mood, to get a performer out of their own head. But this felt different. It wasn't a trick. It was a shift in reality. The only light left on was a single small spotlight. It was aimed right at him. He was isolated in this tiny pool of light surrounded by darkness. He couldn't see the musicians. He couldn't see the recording equipment. He couldn't see his friends lounging on the couches. All he could see was the microphone in front of him. All they could see was his silhouette. The room was silent. The only sound was the gentle hum of the tape machine and the faint trickle of the stone waterfall. Then David Briggs began to play the intro one more time. The notes hung in the dark, quiet room. They sounded different now. More profound, more lonely. He closed his eyes. He took a breath, and he began to sing. The voice that came out was not the voice of the king of rock and roll. It wasn't the voice of the Vegas showman. It was a different voice. It was raw. It was vulnerable. It was filled with a pain and a weariness that was almost unbearable to hear. He wasn't performing the song. He was living it. Every word seemed to come from a place of deep personal experience. When he sang of being lost, you felt it. When he sang of being blind, you believed it. The musicians played behind him, but they weren't just following chords, they were following him. They were caught up in the same emotional wave. They said it felt like they weren't even in the room anymore. It was just him and the song. He went through the first verse. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper at times, but it was heavy with emotion. Then he came to the chorus. He held back, singing it with a kind of gentle reverence. As he moved into the second verse, something began to build. The power in his voice grew, but it wasn't the power of a rock star shouting. It was the power of testimony. It was the sound of a man wrestling with his own demons and finding a sliver of the people in the room were frozen. They had worked with him for years. They had seen him perform hundreds of times. They had never heard anything like this. Some of them would later say they felt a presence in the room, something beyond the people who were there. A stillness, a weight, a feeling that they were witnesses to something sacred. He reached the final verse. By now his voice was soaring. It was filled with a desperate, beautiful, aching sincerity. He wasn't just singing the words, he was praying them. It was a confession and a plea. And when he sang the final line, his voice cracked just for a second. The sound of a man on the edge. Then, silence. The last note from the piano faded into the sound of the waterfall. The tape machine kept rolling, capturing the profound quiet in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The darkness held them all. It felt like minutes passed. They were afraid to break the spell. Finally, someone slowly brought the lights back up. As the room came back into view, they saw him. He was standing at the microphone, with his head bowed. There were tears streaming down his face. He was physically and emotionally spent. He looked up at the control booth, his eyes red. He said, in a quiet, hoarse voice, "That's it. Don't make me do that again." He didn't have to. They all knew what they had just captured. It wasn't just a good take. It wasn't even a great take, it was something else. It was a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. They had recorded not just a song, but an experience. So what happened in that dark room? Did he have a supernatural experience? It depends on what you mean by supernatural. For some people who believe in a hands-on God, the answer is simple. Yes. God entered that room. He saw a man struggling, a man who had been given so much, but who was still a lost child inside. And in that moment of darkness and surrender, God touched his spirit and allowed him to channel the true meaning of that hymn. The feeling in the room, the sudden shift from frustration to transcendence, the emotional release, they see it as a small miracle. A moment of genuine divine inspiration. They would say that he didn't just sing about grace, he received it. And it's a compelling idea. His life was a whirlwind of excess and temptation. He often spoke of his own spiritual conflicts. He felt pulled between the sacred and the profane. He was a deeply religious man living a life that often seemed to contradict his own beliefs. Perhaps, in that moment of complete focus, with the outside world stripped away by the darkness, he was able to connect with his faith in a way he couldn't on a normal day. Maybe he felt a sense of forgiveness or peace that overwhelmed him, and what came out on the tape was the sound of that experience. But there are other ways to look at it. A psychologist might offer a different explanation, one that is just as powerful but rooted in the human mind. They would say what happened was not supernatural but profoundly psychological. Here was a man under enormous pressure. He was trying to connect with the music of his childhood, the music of his mother, who he had lost years before but still mourned deep. That music represented a time of innocence, of safety, of pure faith. His frustration in the studio wasn't just about getting a song right. It was about his inability to get back to that feeling. He felt like a phony, a showman in a jumpsuit trying to sing about humility and redemption. His anger was a sign of a deep internal conflict. When the lights went out, everything changed. It was a form of sensory deprivation. The distractions were gone. The faces of the other musicians, the pressure of being the king, all of it vanished into the dark. As he was left alone with his own thoughts, his own memories, his own pain, the darkness forced him to go inward. And what he found there was a lifetime of spiritual yearning, of loneliness, of feeling like a sinner in need of saving. The performance wasn't a miracle from an outside force. It was an act of complete and total emotional catharsis. He wasn't channeling God, he was channeling himself. All the parts of him that he hid from the world, fear, the sadness, the little boy from Tupelo, came pouring out. The tears at the end weren't just from religious ecstasy, they were tears of release. The release of a man who, for 3 minutes, was able to be completely, brutally honest through a song. It was a breakthrough, a moment of intense personal therapy that just happened to be recorded. And then there's a third view, the view of the pragmatist, the showman's view. This view suggests that he was, first and foremost, the greatest performer in the world. He knew what a song needed. He knew how to create a mood. He knew that the first few takes were bland and lifeless. He was a master of the studio. He had been doing this for almost 20 years. Is it possible that his frustration was real, but that he also knew how to use it? Is it possible that the idea to turn off the lights was a brilliant piece of stagecraft, a way to create the perfect atmosphere for a legendary performance? A great actor uses their own emotions to fuel a scene. A great singer can do the same thing. Maybe he wasn't having a supernatural experience or a psychological breakdown. Maybe he was just doing his job and doing it better than anyone else on the planet. He needed to get to a place of vulnerability to sing the song honestly, so he created the conditions that would get him there. The darkness, the isolation, the dramatic build-up, it was all part of the performance. He wasn't just singing the song, he was directing the entire emotional arc of the recording. The tears at the end were real, yes, but they were the real tears of an artist who has given every last piece of himself to his art. It was the exhaustion that comes from a perfect, draining performance. So which one is it? A miracle? A breakdown? A masterful performance? Maybe the real answer is that it was all three at once. His faith was real, his emotional pain was real, and his talent as a performer was undeniable. These things weren't separate parts of him, they were all tangled up together. On that night, in the darkness of the jungle room, they all came together in a perfect, unrepeatable storm. His genuine faith provided the foundation. His personal struggles gave the performance its raw, believable pain. And his instincts as a master showman allowed him to focus those things and channel them through the microphone in a way that was both devastating and beautiful. You don't have to choose one explanation. The power of the story and the power of the recording itself is that it can hold all of these truths at the same time. It's a moment that feels wholly, deeply human, and brilliantly artistic all at once. The musicians who were there that night never forgot it. For them, it was more than just another day at the office. They were all professionals, veterans of countless recording sessions, but they all speak of this one as being different. Something special happened. They felt it then, and they felt it every time they heard the playback. They had captured lightning in a bottle, a moment of pure, unfiltered soul. The recording that resulted from that strange night is unlike almost anything else in his vast catalog. There are no frills. The production is simple, the focus is entirely on the vocal. It is a stark, stripped-down performance. It is the sound of a man alone in the dark, singing a prayer. It's a recording that has brought comfort to millions of people. People listen to it at funerals, in times of trouble, when they need to feel that they are not alone. They hear the weariness in his voice, the plea for mercy, and the flicker of hope. And they feel a connection. Not to a superstar, but to a fellow human being who understood what it meant to be lost and to hope to be found. In the end, it doesn't really matter if what he experienced was supernatural or not. The effect is the same. He went to a place of deep emotional and spiritual truth, and he brought back a recording that allows us to glimpse it for ourselves. We can't know for sure what was in his heart or his mind in that moment. All we have is the evidence left on the tape. The sound of a voice, a piano, and a soul laid bare. The song he was singing, the one that gave him so much trouble and ultimately produced a moment of legend, was Amazing Grace.